I didn't think getting locked out of my own house would ever become a legal battle, let alone one I'd end up winning in the most backwards way possible. And I definitely didn't expect the people who blocked me to later depend on me just to get home. It started out simple, quiet, even. The kind of quiet you don't question until it's gone. My name's Daniel Harper, and about 6 years ago, I bought a piece of land just outside a planned neighborhood called Ridgeview Estates, somewhere in Northern California. Not the flashy kind of suburb, just rows of tidy homes, trimmed hedges, HOA newsletters that showed up whether you read them or not. But my place, it wasn't really part of that neighborhood. See, my property sat just beyond it, tucked behind a stretch of land that used to be an old orchard. Before the developers came in and carved everything into lots and cul-de-sacs, that whole area was farmland. Apples, mostly. My house sat on what used to be the edge of it. Now, the only way to reach my property was a narrow gravel road that cut straight through Ridgeview Estates. It wasn't pretty, didn't match the clean asphalt streets around it, but it had been there long before the neighborhood existed. And more importantly, my deed included a permanent access easement along that road, something recorded decades back, way before I ever showed up, which basically meant I had the legal right to use that road. No permission needed, no conditions, and for a long time, nobody cared. I'd drive through the neighborhood, wave at whoever happened to be walking their dog or checking their mail. Sometimes delivery trucks followed the same path to get to my place. Nobody complained. Nobody made it weird. It was just part of the layout. If anything, people seemed to forget I wasn't technically one of them. There was this older guy, Frank Delaney, lived near the entrance, retired, always out front with a coffee mug like he was guarding the place out of habit more than duty. First time we met, he just nodded and said, "You're the guy with the house in the back, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." He shrugged, took a sip of his coffee. "Long as you don't drive like a maniac, we're good." That was about as official as it got. For years, that was the tone. Casual, unspoken understanding. Until the HOA decided they needed to improve the community. You know how that goes. It started with an email blast. I wasn't even on their mailing list, but one of the neighbors forwarded it to me with a little note. "Thought you should see this." Subject line, Ridgeview Enhancement Initiative, which already sounded expensive. Inside, it talked about installing a decorative entrance gate. Security, property value, all the usual buzzwords. They had renderings, stone pillars, iron bars, keypad entry, the whole deal. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, people like gates. Makes them feel safe, I guess. And technically, I wasn't part of the HOA, so whatever they wanted to build inside their neighborhood, that was their business. I skimmed it, shrugged, went back to my day. Looking back now, that was probably the last normal moment in this whole thing. A couple weeks later, I came home late, sun already down, headlights cutting through that gravel stretch like always. But something fell off before I even got close. There was this glow up ahead, not streetlights, something harsher. And then I saw it. A steel gate, right across the road. Not just decorative either, solid, locked, with a keypad mounted on a post, and a bright white sign that read, "Private community access only." I remember just sitting there for a second, engine running, trying to process what I was looking at. Because that road, that was my only way in. I pulled up closer, rolled down my window, stared at the keypad like it might explain itself. No code, no instructions, just a button for the intercom. So I pressed it. There was a pause, long enough to make me wonder if it even worked. Then a voice crackled through. "Ridgeview Estates, this is Mark." Calm, professional, like a front desk somewhere. I said, "Hey, I think there's been a mistake. I live past this road. The gate's blocking access to my property." Another pause. Then, "Sir, the gate was activated earlier today. This is now a controlled access community." I let out a short laugh, more confused than anything. "Right, I get that, but my house is back there. This road leads to it." His tone didn't change. "Well, currently we're reviewing non-resident access. If you're not part of the HOA, you may need to apply for a special access agreement." That's when it hit me. He wasn't confused. He was serious. I leaned closer to the intercom. "I don't need an agreement. I have a legal easement on this road. It's in my deed." Silence. Then, "I understand your concerns, sir. You'll need to bring that up with the board. For now, access is restricted." Click. That was it. No apology. No solution. Just locked out. I sat there for a while after that, engine still idling, staring at that gate like it might just open on its own if I waited long enough. It didn't. So I backed up, drove out, parked near the highway, and walked the rest of the way to my house in the dark. And I'll be honest, that walk changed something. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic movie moment. But step by step, with every crunch of gravel under my shoes, that quiet arrangement I'd taken for granted started to feel a lot less stable. Because this wasn't just an inconvenience. They hadn't just built a gate. They'd decided, without asking, without warning, that they could control whether I got to my own front door. And the worst part? They seemed to think they were completely within their rights to do it. By the time I reached my porch, I already knew. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. This was the beginning of something else entirely. And I had no idea yet just how far it was going to go. The next morning, I didn't wait around. I dug out every document I had from when I bought the property. Closing papers, title report, the original survey maps. And there it was, clear as day, buried in a few pages of legal language most people never read. A permanent access easement. Not temporary. Not conditional. Permanent. It described the exact strip of land too. That same gravel road cutting through Ridgeview Estates, connecting my place to the main highway. It had been recorded decades ago, long before the subdivision existed, back when the whole area was still orchard land. Which meant one thing, plain and simple. They couldn't legally block it. So I made copies, highlighted the relevant sections, even added sticky notes like I was turning in homework, and drove back to the gate. Still locked. Still silent. This time I pressed the intercom with a little more purpose. Same voice picked up. Mark. Ridgeview Estates. Yeah, Mark, it's Daniel, the guy you locked out last night. A pause, like he recognized the situation but didn't want to deal with it. I have documentation showing I have a legal easement on this road. I can email it, drop it off, whatever you need. But this gate needs to be opened. Another pause, longer this time. I'll notify the board, he said finally. They're currently reviewing all access policies. I exhaled slowly. Mark, this isn't a policy issue. It's a legal right. I understand your position, sir. That word, position, it stuck with me. Like this was a debate. Like we were negotiating terms. We'll be in touch, he added, and then, click. Same ending. I stood there for a second, hands still on the intercom, then just shook my head and walked back to my truck. That became the routine. Every day, for the next couple weeks, I'd park outside, walk in, walk out. Sometimes I'd press the intercom again, just to see if I'd get a different answer. I never did. What I did get, though, was time. A lot of time to think. And if you've ever been forced to slow down like that, really slow down, you know your mind starts connecting dots you didn't even know were there. At first, I was focused on the obvious, getting my access back, maybe talking to a lawyer, figuring out how to push the HOA to comply. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't sit right. Because HOAs, for all their rules and overconfidence, they usually don't take risks they can't defend. Blocking a legally recorded easement? That's not a gray area. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. So either they didn't understand what they were doing, or they thought they had some kind of leverage I didn't. And that's when I started digging deeper. Not into their rules, but into the land itself. One evening, after another long walk back from the highway, I pulled up the county property records online. It's all public if you know where to look. Parcel maps, ownership details, boundaries, history. At first, it was just curiosity. I wanted to see exactly how the subdivision had been divided up. But then I noticed something. The gravel road, it didn't line up cleanly with a single parcel. It cut across multiple lots, some owned by the HOA, some technically part of individual properties, but right at the entrance, where it met the highway, there was a narrow strip. Thin, easy to overlook. And it wasn't labeled under the HOA. I zoomed in, adjusted the layers, cross-checked the parcel number. Different owner. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. That didn't make sense. If the HOA controlled the gate, and the gate sat at the entrance, but the actual connection to the highway wasn't theirs, then what exactly were they controlling? The next day, I skipped the walk. Instead, I drove straight to the county records office. There's something about seeing things in person, old maps, physical documents, that makes it feel more real, less abstract. I found the parcel again, pulled the file, and there it was. A leftover piece of land, about 20 feet wide, stretching from the edge of the subdivision out to the highway. Originally part of the orchard property, never fully absorbed into the development when Ridgeview Estates was built. Probably an oversight. Or maybe just something that didn't seem important at the time. But now it was the only direct connection between that entire neighborhood and the outside world. I checked the ownership. A name I didn't recognize. No company, no HOA, just an individual. Out of state. And then I saw the status. Listed. For sale. I actually laughed. Out loud. Right there in the records office. Got a couple looks from people around me, but I didn't care. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about getting back access. This was something else. Something bigger. I went home that afternoon. Walked in. Same as usual. But this time my frustration had shifted into something sharper. More focused. I looked up the owner. Took a bit of digging. But eventually, I found a phone number tied to the name. An older guy named Leonard Bishop, living somewhere in Arizona. I called. It rang longer than I expected. I was just about to hang up when he picked up. Hello. His voice sounded cautious, like he wasn't used to unknown numbers. Hi, is this Leonard Bishop? Yeah, who's this? My name's Daniel Harper. I'm calling about a piece of land you own in California, a small strip near Ridgeview Estates. There was a pause, then a confused chuckle. I own land in California? Apparently you do. That got his attention. We talked for a while, longer than I expected. Turns out, he inherited that parcel from his brother years ago. Hadn't visited it, hadn't developed it, barely even remembered it existed. To him, it was just a leftover. Is it worth anything? He asked at one point. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about that gate, about the HOA, about every car that passed through that entrance without a second thought. More than you think, I said. But I didn't overplay it. No big pitch. No pressure. Just told him I was interested, that it connected to my property, that it would make things simpler for me if I owned it outright. We went back and forth a bit on price. Nothing dramatic. And within a week, we had a deal. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. Maybe because no one else was paying attention. No bidding war. No complications. Just a quiet transaction. And then, one morning, I got the confirmation. Recorded. Finalized. That narrow strip of land, the one piece everyone had overlooked, now belonged to me. I drove out to it that same day, parked right at the edge where it met the highway, stepped out, and just stood there for a minute. Cars passed behind me, heading into Ridgeview Estates, through that shiny new gate, over land that, as of that morning, was mine. And the thing is, nothing looked different. Same road, same traffic, same quiet neighborhood beyond the gate. But underneath it all, everything had changed. Because now, every single resident, every delivery truck, every visitor, had to cross my property first. And they had no idea. Not yet. I didn't call the HOA. Didn't send an email. Didn't press the intercom. I just waited. Because I knew sooner or later, they were going to realize. And when they did, this whole situation was going to flip in a way they never saw coming. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days. That's all it took. On the third morning after the transfer went through, I was halfway through my coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Daniel Harper, I said. A voice on the other end, tight, controlled. Mr. Harper, this is Karen Whitfield, president of the Ridgeview Estates HOA. Of course it was. I leaned back in my chair, glanced out the window toward the gravel road that had started all of this, and said, yeah. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. A brief pause. So she knew. Or at least, she suspected. We've recently been made aware, she continued, choosing her words carefully, that you've acquired a parcel of land adjacent to the community entrance. Adjacent? I said, a small smile creeping in. That's one way to put it. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Then she cleared her throat. That parcel appears to be part of the access route used by our residents. Not appears, I said. It is. Silence. You could almost hear her recalibrating in real time. Well, she said finally, we'd like to discuss how we can maintain a cooperative relationship moving forward. There it was. Not if. How. I took a sip of my coffee, let the moment breathe just a little. Funny, I said. I tried to have that conversation a few weeks ago. Her tone shifted, just a fraction. Mr. Harper, I believe there may have been some misunderstandings regarding your access. No, I cut in, still calm. There wasn't a misunderstanding. I told your manager I had a legal easement. I sent documents. And your solution was to lock the gate and tell me to apply for permission to use my own driveway. That landed. She didn't interrupt this time. I went on, a little slower now. I parked by the highway for 2 weeks, Karen. Walked home every night. So let's not pretend this is about miscommunication. A long exhale on the other end. Then, softer, more measured. What would you like to see happen? That question, it carried weight. Because at that point, I had options. Not revenge, at least, not in the dramatic sense, but leverage. Real, legal leverage. I could have made things difficult. Could have restricted access, forced negotiations, dragged it out the same way they had. But standing there in my kitchen, phone to my ear, I realized something. I didn't actually want to become them. I want my access restored, I said. Fully. No conditions. Written acknowledgement of my easement, and a permanent code for that gate. That can be arranged, she replied quickly. Too quickly. And, I added, we're going to be clear about something going forward. You don't get to decide whether I can reach my property. That was never your call. Another pause. Then, quietly, understood. We wrapped the call not long after that. No raised voices. No threats. Just a shift. 2 days later, I got an envelope in the mail. Inside, formal documentation from the HOA. It acknowledged my easement in clear, legal terms. No vague language, no loopholes. Just a straightforward statement of my right to access that road at all times. There was also a printed sheet with a gate code. Permanent. No expiration. No restrictions. I drove out that evening just to test it. Pulled up to the gate, rolled down my window, punched in the code. For a second, nothing happened. Then the mechanism clicked, and the gate slowly swung open. Same road, same path, but this time, it felt different. Not because of the code, because of what it represented. I drove through, gravel crunching under the tires, houses passing by on either side. A couple people were out, walking dogs, checking mail, same as always. Only now, I couldn't help but notice. Every single one of them had driven over that entrance strip to get here. My land. And most of them had no idea. Life settled down after that. The routine came back. No more parking by the highway, no more long walks in the dark. The tension faded, at least on the surface. The HOA kept their gate. The neighborhood kept its sense of control, its tidy appearance, its rules. And me? I kept my access. But there was one thing that had quietly, permanently changed. Control. Not the obvious kind, the gate, the codes, the signage. The underlying kind. Because now, whether they liked it or not, the entire neighborhood relied on a piece of land they didn't own. A piece of land they'd overlooked. A piece of land they once tried to use against me, without realizing how exposed they really were. I didn't bring it up again. Didn't send letters. Didn't make demands. But every now and then, I drive past that entrance, slow down just a little, and think about how close they came to a very different outcome. Because it could have gone that way. I could have restricted access. I could have installed my own gate, my own rules. And legally, I might have had the right to. But here's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this. Winning doesn't always mean pushing as far as you can. Sometimes it just means making sure no one can push you again. Still, not everyone saw it that way. A few weeks after everything settled, I ran into Frank, the older guy from the beginning, standing out front like usual, coffee in hand. He gave me a look as I slowed my truck. Heard you and the HOA had a little situation, he said. Something like that. He nodded toward the entrance. Also heard you own that strip out there now. Word travels fast. Yeah, I said. He took a sip of his coffee, studied me for a second, then smirked just a little. Funny how things work out. I shrugged. Guess so. He didn't say anything else after that. Just raised his mug slightly, and went back to watching the street. And that's kind of where it stayed. No more conflict. No more drama. Just a quiet understanding, sitting underneath everything. But I still think about it sometimes. About how easily it could have gone the other way. About how a group of people, convinced they were protecting their community, ended up overstepping into something they didn't fully understand. And how one small, overlooked detail changed the balance completely. So here's the question I keep coming back to. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Would you have stopped where I did? Or would you have taken it further, used that leverage, made a point, maybe even flipped the entire power dynamic for good? Because depending on who you ask, I either handled it the right way, or I let them off easy. Curious what you think. Drop your take in the comments. What's fair, what's not, and where you would have drawn the line if this was your property, your access, your fight. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that forgot where its authority ends. You probably already know. This kind of story isn't as rare as it should be.